Hello, beautiful.
Hello.
Hello, hello, beautiful humans of planet Earth. It's been a while since I've done a Facebook video conversation, and I love that this actually is the first video dialogue that I've had of 2020, and I love that this is the conversation that is kicking off the 2020 video conversations with my friend Daniel Sitaramdas Shankin. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Excellent. So I really appreciate this man, Daniel. You're the founder, right, of TAM Integration.
Yes.
And how would you describe what TAM Integration is and where it's based out of?
Tam Integration is based in Marin County. Mount Tam is the large mountain in Marin. So it's sort of like the kind of, in my mind, sort of the geographical and spiritual center. If you're interested in being oriented and connected to the earth.
Mm-hmm.
What TAM Integration does is offers community around spiritual growth, which is often facilitated by psychedelic and entheogenic practice.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that people do their practice, and that their entheogenic use has an element of that desire to grow. That desire of being a little bit diligent and a little bit rigorous. Maybe not too much, sometimes more than others, but at least having a seed of a desire to become. And this is always the paradox. Becoming is often a paradox, right? Because on one hand, we're becoming better versions, or we're becoming different, and on the other hand, we discover that we're becoming more ourselves, more of that which is fundamental or essential. So we have circles and educational events and things of that nature,
Mm.
conversations like this.
I love that. And I connected with Daniel about just over a year, maybe 2 years ago. He and I held a panel discussion called The Intersection of Ethics, Intimacy, and Psychedelics, and really creating a space for us to explore, for me, the overlap or the places where the world of sexuality and tantra and the gurus in that realm, and then the world of psychedelics and sit in psychedelic spaces and group experiences intersect. And how do we have a conversation about the underlying energies that play into coming into whether it's a sexual or a psychedelic experience from a point of connection to self, clarity, and power. And it was a really rich conversation that I believe triggered a fair amount of people, and also seemed to be really supportive and helpful to a lot of people and inspiring to a lot of people. So a year and a half down the road,
Now,
yes.
nobody was lukewarm about it. They loved it or they hated it. It was cool.
Yeah, and I actually appreciate that. I'm okay with that rub and that discomfort, because to me it's when we're triggered in one way or the other, when we're inspired by something or when we're challenged by something, there's a rub that creates heat within us, and it creates space for transformation to occur. So a year and a half later, Daniel's doing his things, I'm doing my things. We like doing things together, and and we're holding I don't know if you call it a workshop, I'd call it more of an interactive dialogue in Oakland, California on Thursday, March 12th, which is next Thursday, for an event called Designing Transformational Containers for Psychedelic Experiences. And basically, I'll speak from my perspective, and then Daniel, you can share as well, is that, psychedelics, especially in the Bay Area, and any form of medicine that alters consciousness, is becoming something that's more and more on people's consciousness, and are things that people are wanting to and already are actively exploring. They open up realms of consciousness that are beyond what many of us could possibly imagine or think to experience in our normal waking state of reality. And as we open these dimensions and these portals of reality that can facilitate so much healing and joy and fulfillment and depth of connection, it's also so important to figure out, how do we create containers? And we'll talk a little bit about what a container is, but creating containers, whether it's a solo experience, an experience with another person, or an experience in a group of people that support us in being connected to our boundaries, our desires, and enough safety within the experience that we can surrender and really be available to what can potentially occur.
Right, which is all the more important, talking about, to move forward from our first conversation. And I don't know if the people watching have seen the new article that came out in Quartz. There's an
Mm,
article in quartz.com about all of the various abuse cases that are emerging, that have been happening with psychedelic therapists.
mm,
And so, these are often MAPS sponsored therapists, and they're getting involved in these relationships that maybe seem consensual, but kind of not. And it's very messy and it's very murky. And people with, deep trauma are getting hurt. And, the question in one of the questions in the article is, how do we create oversight committees?
mm,
Like these external ethics committees that watch out for these sorts of things. And that's one way, that's exoteric. I tend to be an esoteric kind of person. And so the question is like, how do people who care develop, the sensitivity and the kind of qualities that make them a safe conduit for transformation, right? It's like, how do I become a safe container? What's required of me? And like, how do I up level my quality of being so that I have a chance to not be a menace, if that
mm,
makes sense. And so that's, one of the things that, and not to be too heavy handed, it's like, I wouldn't want people to think they're going to come and get a lecture about ethics. It's not about that. It's just about, how do we tune our sensitivity to kind of be more in service, right? Because if I'm in service to you, it's not about like necessarily me and what I get out of things. It's about, this is the idea of holding space. Holding space it's for you. It's not necessarily for me, although I am, of course, benefited by it.
mm. Yes. And to me, this applies regardless of whether you are holding space for another person in a psychedelic experience, or whether you're holding space for yourself
Mm-hmm.
in a psychedelic experience. And to me, a lot of what I feel inspired to bring into this interactive dialogue, I'm sure we'll do some practices to really give people a felt sense of what we're talking about here, is, to me, a conversation of where we've been trained to give power to an external authority, and in so doing have become disconnected from the felt sense in our body
Mm-hmm.
of, what does my yes feel like, what does my no feel like, how do I come into connection with my intuition and actually learn how to create a language with my intuition, so that I can come into a psychedelic experience where, let's face it, psychedelics are a space where kind of rules break away. And in a lot of my coaching work and my transformational coaching work, so much of the work that I'm helping people do is getting into their bodies to discern what their boundaries are. And boundaries are such a big part of psychedelic experiences, especially in group spaces, getting clear on what the boundaries are. And often an attachment to black or white, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, this is acceptable in all circumstances, this is not acceptable in all circumstances, um, in a way takes us out of our own inner authority and our
Mm-hmm.
ability to be present in a psychedelic experience and in connection, even if we're by ourselves, in connection with what is unfolding in the experience, and being able to engage with it from a place of curiosity and approval, as opposed to fear and feeling not safe and like I don't know how I'm feeling and that I just need to check out or dissociate because I don't trust myself here. So to
Mm-hmm.
me, a lot of this conversation is about anchoring into the body and coming into our psychedelic experiences from a place of inner authority.
Yes. Yes. I can't tell you how many times I talk to, clients, and they get pulled out of their center due to something seeming like the thing about sex and drugs is that they can be kind of glamorous, right? And so like the idea of maybe trying or doing something or being a part of some sort of circle, even though it maybe doesn't feel exactly right, is that there's like, oh, there's a glamour to me doing this thing or doing that thing. And I can get seduced by my own interpretations of what I see.
Mm,
Right, because there's just a bunch of people over there doing what they're doing. People, there's just people over there on their own trip. Right, we're going to assume that they're not sociopaths, they're not out to harm us. Right, but there's
mm,
just a world of people doing people things, and I see some of that and I was like, oh, I wish I want to be part of that. I would be somehow better if that.
mm.
And due to some sort of perceived lack in myself, right, or lack of trust in myself. And
Or the
so,
present moment.
right, and that too. And so, again, feeling into the body of that sort of almost graspiness versus like, oh, I'm okay, like there's enoughness. And that transformation seems to happen in the place of enoughness, in the this is okay the way it is.
Yeah.
Like a relaxed presence will produce better results. I'll just say, my money down 9 times out of 10, relaxed presence will produce better results than some sort of grasping after the glamorous.
Totally. Well, and adding into that of the relaxed presence, if we're looking at this from a place of openness and expansiveness versus contraction, if we are in resistance to what is happening, what winds up happening is that we create a state of contraction
Mm-hmm.
within the body, which we think, oh, that's protecting us, but it's actually clamping down on the experience that we don't want to have.
I get
So
so bummed out about my contraction. It's so embarrassing. It's ridiculous.
I was going to write this article about how anal sex is a really good practice in non-attachment in Buddhism because, uh, if I don't know if you've ever experienced anal sex, but for me, clamping down around what's being inserted in you because
Mm-hmm.
it's painful just winds up creating significantly more pain.
Right.
However, if you can actually surrender into the experience and open, it's something that can become deeply pleasurable. So I believe a lot of what we are learning, yes, in sex, and also taking this into our psychedelic experiences, is to me, psychedelic experiences in many ways are they offer a deepened, amplified, and also limitless reflection of how we experience and perceive our waking day reality. And we get to
Mm-hmm.
see our reaction patterns. What do we do when we're afraid? What are the stories we create about what is happening that perpetuate lack, fear, scarcity, or love, openness, connection? And I feel like so much of what we are learning how to do, whether you're a facilitator, if you're a facilitator in these experiences, it's so important. Um, like looking at our attachment to being right and
Mm-hmm.
how our attachment to being right and the fear of not being safe if we're not right as a facilitator can actually cause more harm because we sacrifice vulnerability and connection in order to preserve our rightness. So I believe a lot of this work in creating containers within ourselves or within groups around psychedelic experiences is finding safety in being able to let go and surrender and
Mm-hmm.
trust ourselves to be present and engaged in the present moment.
Right.
Do you like how I wove in anal sex into this really beautiful metaphor for psychedelic
It was
experiences?
lovely. It was
Thank you.
lovely. I'm not touching it. Um, But I'm just thinking about, you know, finding that spaciousness in the face of a reactive tendency to
Mm.
either resist or to grasp, right, is huge for both the, somebody who is sort of traveling through a space and putting their faith in some sort of guide, and is also even more important for the guide, and creates an ability to see through potential pitfalls, right? Like it really creates an ability to notice where things might go wrong, and gives one the ability to kind of not take the bait of kind of dropping the vibration, if you will,
Mm.
of not playing into, because stuff comes up, right? Stuff comes up for people. And it's often a perfect excuse to be less present, you know? And so if one does that, then, the quality of the work really suffers, right? Because, if we're in this sort of new, psychedelic industry where there are above ground and below ground practitioners all over the place who hopefully want to create like a really rarefied quality, in the space of their sessions. I'm really interested in, the parts of these sessions that sort of can't really be talked about too well, right? That are really very subtle.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to be like, oh, sometimes we hug people if there's this, or, we hold their hand, or we say it just lean into it, like these sort of rote best practices, and these sort of very obvious methodologies are one thing, but is what does it take to sort of be in the vibration, be in the field of what is happening between all the people who are there.
Yes. And this is where things get really tricky and complicated and interesting, because you can train, right? You can have all these trainings for all these protocols around how you're supposed to show up. And then we get into these experiences, which, let's face it, are beyond anything that we could actually know or control. And that's a big part of why we're moving into these experiences, is to create circumstances where we can release the illusion of control and create openness in our body for experience to move, for things
Mhm.
to move through our bodies. And what I find is that it's to be truly of service in these spaces, it requires us to trust in our own felt sense, intuitive guidance as it emerges in the moment, as opposed to following a protocol, which it could be the same thing. But to me, this is pointing again to where we live in a culture that has given us a black and white way of this is right, this is wrong, these are the protocols, these are the structures. And by the way, our society is falling apart. And to me, there is a new way that is needing to emerge, where rather than looking for, external, oh, well, this is the protocol, instead having a fusion where it's not just the protocol, but it's, are you connected to the felt sense in your body? Are you
Mhm.
connected to your heart? Are you willing to be vulnerable? Because the only way that we can truly be connected with and intuitive of another person's needs in this space is to be willing to be vulnerable and open and receptive, which old
Mhm.
school leadership positions are taught don't do that.
Mhm. So, and then what is it like? What is the felt sense of the psychic atmosphere around us? You know what I mean? Like, because I move into these spaces where it's like, oh, like I can sort of feel like what the vibe is like in this room,
Hmm.
right? And so then that is like, there's a certain felt sense of that in my body.
Yeah.
And then potentially, depending on a lot of things, maybe I can engage that in a way that creates a potential, right? In a way that I guess I decide, I have to, in a way that seems to be beneficial, right? That seems to be of service. And so it's like, how do we kind of use our body not just as a receiver, but also as an instrument by which the vibrations of the space are tuned.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful question. And to me, I hear that as how do I become a clear channel for the divine to move through me? I know we were having this conversation a while back around how do we weave the sacred in here? How do we weave the divine grace, as you called it, in here? And one of the reasons that I'm so turned on about the way psychedelics are coming into the modern day world is that it requires us to acknowledge the sacred. It
Mhm.
requires us to acknowledge the spiritual. And this is the same thing for my non-psychedelic, just working with clients of how do I become a clear channel for the divine truth that wishes to flow through me, and do the work of getting my ego out of the way so that it can be pristine.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I am caught up in the desire to be right, if I'm caught up in the desire to be seen in a certain way, it can become dangerous. And I've
Mm-hmm.
actually found that humility, humbleness, devotion, openness, gratitude, service to the earth over and over again
Mm-hmm.
is essential.
Mm-hmm. Well, like Neem Karoli Baba said, it's better to love everyone than it is to try and figure it out. Right? It's like at any given time, well, not only we can't know what's going on. Like we can't really know what's happening. We can't really know what's going on in another person, in another person's experience. And being that we can't figure it out and that we probably can't do the best thing, right? It's like we're probably not we don't know what's going on and we're probably going to get it wrong. Um, so with that level of humility, it's like my only option is to sort of be as kind as possible.
And adding a note in there that being as loving and as kind as possible does not mean sacrificing one's boundaries.
Oh
The
yeah,
type
yeah,
of,
for sure.
but that's to me, that's something that needs to be spoken and be aware of in all spaces, and especially psychedelic spaces, because so many people, from my experience, so many
Mm-hmm.
people carry around that to be loving and to be kind means at the expense of myself. I need to sacrifice myself, my feelings, my desires, my energy in order to caretake another person's experience so that I
Mm-hmm.
won't lose love.
Right.
And this is a big thing that can come up in psychedelic experiences, is the way we relate to our story of how we secure love and make love stay.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, this is a big place for work.
Sure. I do often talk about the Venn diagram,
Oh yeah.
right? There's this Venn diagram. It's just one circle,
Hmm.
and it's like, people who are deserving of kindness and love. And then since it's the circle is everyone, like you're in there too.
Yeah. Yeah. And this to me is the work of humanity
Mm-hmm.
right now.
And
And
so, I'm expecting a lot of people showing up who are, again, sort of working in the space. And so, the question is like, how do we show up? How does a professional show up, with that kindness and love that is overlaid on top of whatever sort of training that you've, methodology or training that you've received.
yep.
It's like how do we do that? That's the thing, do small things with great love. It's like, how do you perform your work with that?
Beautiful. I love that. That feels wonderful. And the piece that I want to weave in here, we're keeping this to 30 minutes so you can just get a feel for what, may be discussed and explored in this gathering next Thursday, March 12th. So in this title, I wrote adaptogenic containers. And this is something that I would like to propose as a model for creating containers for transformational experiences that we can explore more in our conversation on Thursday, March 12th. And I first came into contact with the term adaptogen when I was working with a really beautiful medicinal cannabis collective startup a few years ago. And I learned about CBD and how CBD is a non-psychoactive component of cannabis that is an adaptogen. And I looked up the phrasing of it, that an adaptogen is an herbal medicine for the claim that's utilized for the claimed stabilization of physiological processes and the promotion of homeostasis. And what I loved about adaptogens is basically they go into the body, they figure out what's out of whack, and their main goal is to create a space where that which is out of alignment can come back into alignment.
Stick it back in whack.
Stick it back in whack. Hashtag.
Well, I mean, what's the opposite of out of whack,
In the whack.
Yeah.
So I like to take the term adaptogen and apply it to spiritual, emotional, psychological, energetic work, where what does it look like to create containers that are clear and grounded and malleable enough that the container is in service to the collective evolution and intention of all parties involved, and that it can itself, the container, evolve in service to what it is that the group or the individual needs in a moment. Because what I often find is that when we have these clear box containers, when people are in transformational work, what will often happen is the person will get to a point where they're opening, but then they'll hit the wall of what is available in the container, where they fulfill the story of I'm too much, I'm too sensitive. Oh, I've hit the point where it's too much. So how do we create adaptogenic containers that support the evolving, opening, deepening, and expanding of an experience that we can't necessarily predict coming into it, which again is, coming back to your question, Daniel, of how do we as holders of these experiences become clear, integrous, grounded, connected channels within ourselves so that we can be of service in these multidimensional containers.
And that is what we will discuss in our workshop with 30 seconds left in in this container.
Yeah. So if whether you're heavily involved in the psychedelic space, if you're facilitating, or if you're like, I've never even moved into the psychedelic space before, but I'm interested, you're welcome. We'll be hosting this at the Heartbeat Collective in Oakland on Thursday, March 12th of next week from 7 to 10 p.m. There are early bird tickets available, and then day of prices will go up. We'll also be having Kiti Kava, bar coming and providing us with delicious teas for you to drink and enjoy. And
where do we get tickets? Where do people get tickets?
Thank you. So I'm going to post a link in the comments below so that you can go and purchase your tickets in advance. If you have a squishy, comfortable cushion that you want to sit on, you're welcome to bring that with you. We'll have seating as well. And curious to hear what it is that you want to hear more about. And very excited, Daniel, to engage in this experience with you.
You too. Thanks for hosting this.
Yeah, total pleasure.
Total
Thanks
pleasure.
for being here. Total pleasure. Bye.